Hey everyone, how are you doing? It's getting to that time of year in London where it's really chilly out, and recently I've been waking up quite early in the morning, like around 5 or 6 a.m. And I found it really nice, though, actually, of getting up and then I just put on my big comfy jumper that I have here and wrap myself in a blanket and get a big cup of tea, and then I'll just read for a few hours, and I find it really peaceful and relaxing and lovely. So yeah, I sort of pull out this jumper every year, and it feels like the jumper always gets more comments and compliments than either me or the books that I talk about. So yeah, it's fun pulling it out every year, but it is a nice jumper. I can't blame people for complimenting it. So I have a number of good new books that I want to talk about, and yeah, really interesting sounding ones that have just been published in November that the publishers have kindly sent me. So first off, there's a new novel called The 10th Muse by Chung. And this is a novel about a young woman who becomes a mathematician, and she wants to solve the greatest equation of her age. But she finds over the course of trying to do that, she researches both her own personal history and uncovers things about her own life that she didn't know, as well as the history of women in her field who have been mathematicians in the past. And this comes with blurbs by Roxane Gay and Thea Obrecht, and who yeah, really praise it highly. Yeah, and it has really beautiful, lovely cover. So yeah, I'm eager to read this. Next is a beautiful little book called Fatherhood by Klaces. And Klaces is mainly a poet, and this is his first novel, but it's a novel in verse. And like I talked about in my last wrap up, I've read a couple books of poetry recently, which are more like narratives. So they're in verse, and you can sort of follow a story all the way through the book. And this is about a young man who's becomes a father for the first time, and his process of discovering fatherhood. And I think the couple move out of the city into the country, and he discovers a different way of life, a slightly disturbing way of life, and that there's disturbing aspects that come with fatherhood, as well as sort of the joys of fatherhood. And this book has a big fan in Max Porter, who says that it's a charming, brilliant and weirdly alarming poem novel about the time-bending strangeness of being a parent. And Max Porter has written about fatherhood really powerfully in his first novel, Grief is the Thing with Feathers, as well. So yeah, seems a good sort of pairing to go with this book. Next is a short novella that I keep hearing about called This Is Pleasure by Mary Gaitskill. And I've been wanting to read Mary Gaitskill for ages. I've seen a number of her novels, but I've just never gotten around to reading her. So I thought this would be a good place to start, because it's really quite short. It's only like 80 or 90 pages, and it's about a friendship between a man and a woman. And the man is very flirtatious, and he keeps he always tries to get women to confide in him their intimate secrets, which produces some slightly uncomfortable results. And his female friend has always been slightly uncomfortable with this, so I think she confronts him about this over the course of the novella. Yeah, and I just keep hearing people discussing this and mentioning this on social media, so I'm very curious to read it for myself. That Reminds Me by Derek Owusu. This is a novel about a boy who's born in London, but is moved out to the countryside, and I think it's a sort of coming of age novel, but told very much in fragments of sort of memories of his past. And I'm really curious to read this author, because he was one of the hosts of a podcast, a literature podcast that I love listening to, called Mostly Lit. And I think he's left the podcast now, but yeah, I've sort of listened to him for ages, and has really articulate, interesting thoughts about literature. So I'm really curious to see what his writing is like itself. The Frequency of Magic by Anthony Joseph. This is a novel about a man in Trinidad who has been writing a novel for over 40 years, and he's been writing it so long that the characters in the novel get impatient and start leaving the realms of fiction and coming into real life. So I think it's sort of breaking the bounds between fact and fiction. And yeah, it sounds like a really curious premise. And but I sort of worry if it would be one of those things that's slightly too gimmicky or too metafictional. But I want to give this novel a try and see. Mutual Admiration Society by Moulton. And this is a nonfiction book, which is a sort of group biography of a group of women in the early 20th century. In 1912, there were a group of women, including the writer Dorothy L. Sayers, well, who became a famous crime writer and poet. And they went to college in Oxford, and they took all the courses and passed all the exams. But because of the rules for women, because there were different rules for men and women at the college, they weren't allowed to get degrees at that time. But then later they returned to the college and received degrees in retrospect. It's about the history of women's rights in Britain, but about this group of women specifically. Consolations by David White. And this is a book which takes 52 words and looks at the fuller meaning of all of those words and sort of the social use of them and the philosophy behind them. So it has the subtitle called The Solace, Nourishment, and Underlying Meaning of Everyday Words. And it has a blurb on it from Maria Popova from Brain Pickings. So I think it's very much that vibe, that kind of philosophical musings about our everyday use of language. Next, I have a novel that I talked about recently in the Times list of the 100 best books of 2019, and that's Ben Lerner's new novel, The Topeka School. And as I mentioned, I've never read this author before, but he's incredibly well regarded. And this book comes with blurbs from people like Sally Rooney and Ocean Vaughn, and so it's about a teenage boy who's going to high school in 1997 and is fairly popular and has sort of a crowd of friends. And he meets another teenage boy who is sort of an outcast, and he tries to draw him into their group of friends to disastrous results. So it traces the story of their friendship, but also issues to do with masculinity. And then I have a fun book, which is Fleabag: The Scriptures by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. And these are the scripts from the TV show Fleabag. And if you've not watched the show Fleabag before, then do yourself a favor over the festive season and watch this TV show, because it's so good. It stars Phoebe Waller-Bridge as a sort of awkward young woman who is a bit kooky. I mean, she runs a cafe called the Guinea Pig Cafe, which is filled with a lot of guinea pigs. And they did a fun thing recently at the Waterstones in Piccadilly in London, where they recreated this guinea pig cafe within the shop, and I was invited to come see it on the morning that it opened. And they didn't have actual guinea pigs in this cafe because they said it would be way too expensive, because they would have to have a handler there the entire time to watch over these guinea pigs. And it was really cool and fun. And yeah, it's good that the scripts of the TV show have been filmed, and I think it has a bunch of additional material in it from the author as well. And it's crazy just how popular this author has become. I think she's sort of become a spokeswoman for a generation of women. From the Mouth of the Whale by Sjon. This is an Icelandic novelist and musician. He's written a lot of music for Bjork, who's I'm going to see in concert tonight, incidentally, which I'm really excited about. And so yeah, I'm curious to read more of his writing. So this is about someone in 1635 in Iceland who is a poet and a self-taught healer who's treated suspiciously by the community, and he's actually exiled to an island off the coast of Iceland, and how on that island he becomes friends with a sandpiper, which is why on the cover of the novel you see a man sort of squatting down, and then there's the reflection of a sandpiper in the bottom, which I think is a really cool design. The Memoir of an Anti-Hero by Kornel Filipowicz. And this is a Polish author. This is a short novel that's just been translated into English for the very first time, though it was written in 1961. And it's about the German invasion into Poland. And it's sort of told from the perspective of someone who was just a normal, ordinary civilian during that time and sort of witnessing this destruction and invasion into his country. And it's about the moral dilemmas of when do you intrude and protest, and when do you just sort of, go with the flow and sort of stay under the radar and stay safe. Then I have a book which I'm very excited about, and it's Genius in Ink by Virginia Woolf. And so this is a newly published book which collects her journalist's writing in the Times Literary Supplement, which she wrote in for, I think, over 30 years. So it's her reflection on a lot of different writers and artists like Charlotte Bronte and George Eliot. And she talks about a number of subjects to do with reading. So there's a whole article about the process of rereading. And it includes a foreword by Ali Smith, which is always wonderful to see. If you're out there, Kendra, and if you're watching this, look out for this book, because it's another book about Virginia Woolf. And then I have another book, which is a collection of contemporary journalist writing called The Collector of Leftover Souls by Eliane Brum. And Eliane Brum is a journalist who's worked in Brazil for many years. And it's different journalistic writings of all different aspects of Brazil, from the rainforest to the drug trade to economic disparity within communities. And I think the author does really interpersonal accounts, interviewing people and just telling the stories of their lives from a very personal perspective. And then I have a couple of anthologies, and the first anthology has the salacious title called Stories About Penises, and this is from a new small press called Guts Publishing, and it's a whole collection of short stories and poetries all around penises, and I think so it's meant to be sort of comical in some ways. Some of the pieces are quite comical, but others of them get into real, like, the philosophy of sexuality, and I love that it opens with this this opening quote from Leonardo da Vinci, who says, "The penis does not obey the order of its master, who tries to erect or shrink it at will, whereas instead the penis erects freely while its master is asleep. The penis must be said to have a mind of its own." And then I have a new anthology called Brave New Words by Sushila Nasta. And this is a whole collection of writing about the importance of literature and writing in our current age. And it includes an essay by Booker Prize winning Bernardine Evaristo, who has an essay called What a Time to Be a Black British Woman Writer, and those are all in parentheses. Then I have a few collections of short stories, and I really like having short stories at this time of year because I have a bit more time to read aloud to my partner, and it's really good to read short stories aloud because, it's a good, concise, small amount of time, bit of text that you can read. So the first book is Humiliation, short stories by Paulina Flores, and this is translated by Megan McDowell, who is the Booker Prize winning translator of Samantha Schweblin. And so the short stories are sort of compared to Samantha Schweblin. I think some of them are slightly surreal in tone. These are stories that are about the fears and contradictions in people's lives that lead to life-changing significance, and how humiliation sort of enters into their life as a consequence of this. And Matthew Sharapa just talked about this on his channel recently, and it sounds really interesting, new book of short stories. Then I have a book called Up in the Main House and Other Stories by Nadeem Zaman, and I think these are slightly surreal stories too, and has a really beautiful sort of trippy cover. It's that popular sort of bright graphic design that some people don't like, but I'm really partial to. And these are short stories about mostly working class people who have a very intimate relationship to their employers' lives, but who are nevertheless separated from them because of the economic divisions between them. And then I have another collection with a really beautiful cover called Nudibranch by Irenosen Okojie. And this actually, she's a journalist as well, and I heard her in just interview recently Bernardine Evaristo, who gives a blurb on the cover of this. And she was in conversation with Evaristo as well as Jennifer Natsambuga Mukumbi at the South Bank Center recently that I went to. And these are slightly surreal stories. Actually, I think some of them are really surreal and strange. I've read a few of them already, and yeah, they're pretty out where. At least they sort of start in reality, but then things get very strange. And so it encompasses a whole range of different kinds of stories. But there's one about a woman who becomes Grace Jones impersonator that I'm really excited to read. And then I have a couple more really beautiful books to talk about, and they're both novels by Erin Morgenstern. And these are the Waterstone special editions of these books. So there's her new novel, The Starless Sea, which I talked about recently in that Time list of 100 best books of the year, as well as a reprint of The Night Circus. And like I said in that video, you know, I enjoyed The Night Circus, but I thought it sort of slid a bit too much into whimsy at some times. But it's a really beautiful new edition with these blue sort of the edges to the pages. And reading the summary of The Starless Sea, I am curious to read it. So it's about a man who goes into a library and discovers sort of the joy of books. And in one book, he discovers his own personal history has been written into this book. And so it's his journey of discovery about why this is, but also uncovering things about his past that he didn't know. And so yeah, I'm really curious to read it. And again, it has these beautiful edges to the pages of these symbols that are these sort of clues that he has to unlock the mystery of his past. So yeah, I'm curious to read it, but it's quite a long novel, so it's one that I'll just sort of have to hunker down with in my big jumper early in the morning to get through. So those are all the books I have. Let me know which ones you're interested in, or if you've got any new books this month that you're really excited to read over the winter months. So hope you're doing well and happy reading, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye everyone.